Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is the first YouTube session of the 10th fall edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. And yes, it is our 10th anniversary. My name is Anusha Kandasivam. I'll be moderating this session for this very special Read for Pixels. The Pixel Project is collaborating with 35 award-winning best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds for the Pixel Project to keep our efforts to end violence against women alive and kicking. We'll be telling you a lot more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser. We have a lot of exclusive author goodies. Get to that a bit later. You can find out about the Pixel Project at our website, www.thepixelproject.net. So we have two very special guests today for the Read for Pixels discussion and reading. We have the fabulous C.S.E. Cooney and the amazing Carlos Hernandez. Here they are. Hi. Okay. So I'm going to just give a little intro, just in case anyone doesn't know them, but I'm sure you all do. So CSE Cooney Claire is a World Fantasy Award-winning author. Her books include Saint Death's Daughter, which is on Kirkus Review's list of the year's science fiction and best fantasy 2022. Darkbreakers, Desdemona and the Deep, the Bone Swan stories, as well as the poetry collection How to Flirt in Fairyland and Other Wild Rhymes. It includes her Rising Award-winning poem, The Sea King's Second Bride. And Carlos, I just noticed you have a exclamation mark after your name. So Carlos, Carlos is the award-winning New York Times bestselling author of Sal and Gabi Break the Universe and Sal and Gabi Fix the Universe, The Assimilated Cuban's Guide to Quantum Santeria, and many shorter works of science fiction and fantasy. He's also an English professor and a game designer. So cool. So Claire and Carlos have very generously donated some absolutely fabulous goodies to the stash of author goodies we have set up as perks for donors on our Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. I'm just going to quickly go through them. So here's what Claire has given us. She's prepared some gorgeous book plus swag bundles that are open to donors worldwide. There were four. I'll tell you what they are. The first is a starter bundle with 3 of Claire's novels, a set of book-themed jewelry, and a bookmark. And then there's Desdemona and the Deep bundle with matching necklace. Oh, there it is. Ooh. With the matching necklace and bookmark. And then Saint Death's Daughter bundle. That's Desdemona and Deep, yeah. Saint Death's Daughter bundle with matching necklace and bookmark. And so cute. I love that cover. Yeah, and one of the Twice Drowned Saint bundle with a matching necklace and a bookmark. Awesome. So 2 of these goodie bundles have already been snapped up. So the starter bundle has gone to a long-time Read for Pixel supporter, Saraswati Kannan, and the Saint Death's Daughter bundle has been snapped up by Jeremy Brett. So thank you so much, Saraswati and Jeremy. So here's what Carlos has. So for donors who are speculative fiction authors, Carlos has 1 online writing consultation session available where he will read the first chapter of the donor's work in progress, which is up to 7,500 words, before conducting a 60-minute Zoom meeting with the donor to offer a constructive critique and to share writing advice. It's a golden opportunity for any writer who's either working on getting their first book published or an experienced author needing a second professional pair of eyes on their work to get expert guidance. So go and get it, guys. Go and get it right now. So our fundraisers just kicked off. We've only raised $1,935, which is 19% towards our $10,000 goal. So please do give generously before the fundraiser ends in October. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. And before we go to the readings, there's one last thing. If you're watching this right now, you're on YouTube, you will also be able to ask Carlos and Claire questions live. Just make sure you're logged onto your YouTube account so you can type your questions in the chat box. And Xiaojin, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me and I'll read them out to Claire and Carlos. Okay, so now on to the readings. We're going to start with Claire. I'll put you on screen and you can go.
Yay! Thank you. So I was asked to read a part of a scene that might show an example of a female character undergoing an act of misogyny, perhaps. So my main character in Saint Death's Daughter is a necromancer, a young necromancer who's grown up under the tutelage of her great-grandfather, who is a ghost. And he is just completely like a terrible war criminal and selfish and dishonest and power hungry. And he's not a good guy or ghost, and he is trying to really pressure her into allowing her to be his vessel so he can walk again in the flesh, basically take over her body. So I wanted to read just a little bit of that scene. The ghost sprang, and Lainey barely had time to dodge into a dusty corner of her cul-de-sac. He missed her by inches, passing partway into the wall and leaving a pale blue splattering behind that quickly flecked off to ash. Shakily, she tried to regain her balance, but before she could straighten from her stumble, the ghost's arms shot out, pinning her between them against the wall. Grandpa Brad's precise manifestation of himself rippled. His chest expanded until it was swollen as bulbously, as tight as his gut. And then, deliberately, piercing the meticulous confines he'd set for himself, the ghost plucked the memory of his ribs free from the memory of his breastbone and began extruding them outward. He pushed the bones past the appearance of his skin, past layers of silk, through stiffened velvet and leather, until they closed around Lainey, a cage of ribs in truth, all glowing that sticky, shocky, static blue. Now, said the ghost, so close that Lainey could smell him, either you give me what I want, or I'm going to vomit such a sludge of actinica down your throat you'll perish of it. You'll die, miscellaneous stones, right here tonight, all alone. I swear it by my own name. To Lainey, who shrank from the lightning blaze of those bony bars all around her, it was as if everything he was promising had already come to pass. Her throat squeezed shut at the thought of all his festering actinica, so much of it that it would split her apart, pouring into her like sawdust into a stocking, burying her under its avalanche, never stopping, not even when she did. Her heart pounded, her head swam, tears ran down her face. The ghost leaned closer. I want a vessel. I want free of this padlock and that great lumpen thing I'm bound to. I want to live. I want to walk. And you, girlie, I'm afraid are my only viable option. Now crack my lock, break me free, invite me into you. She would die, but so would Goody. And wasn't that what Lainey had promised? And yet, after, the thin logical voice at the back of her mind laid it all out for her. Grandpa Rad would keep going on until he found another vessel to possess. Perhaps that hapless future someone would not be as strong as Lainey, or would be more naive even than she. No, miscellaneous. Lainey's practical, reasonable, not at all terrifyingly calm voice told the petrified rest of her, what you have to do is deal with Grandpa Rad first. Then see to Goody, like you promised. There is still time. There has to be. And if not, Lainey shoved the if not into a box and slammed it shut. There would be no if not. She took her deep voice, and its undreaming slid them deeper into her bones and bid them both bitterly to bide. At last she found her speaking voice, though it was cold, cracklingly cold, and not at all familiar to her ears. All the actinica in you, Grandpa Rad, said that voice very slowly, belongs to me. Just like I said, boasted the ghost. Just like you said, she conceded. My blood, my magic. And here she grinned. Some distant, dreadful part of her was aware that her grin was identical to the ghost's, but the rest of her could not care. All the actinica in you, therefore, Lainey concluded, obeys me. What? Grandpa Rad snapped, head rearing back, rib cage pulsing with such a light of indignation that Lainey's molars ached. What are you? Raising both her hands to her chest, palms out, Lainey said, Irradiant stones, I command you to back off, and pushed. That's all the little excerpt that I'm going to read today.
That was so awesome. So expressive. Delightful, yeah. It was so cool. Such a exciting scene. I remember reading that and thinking like, "Oh, she's so cool. This miscellaneous stones." I can I just say before we go into Carlos, I love the names of your characters. They're so awesome.
They're just so
Miscellaneous
funny.
stones.
They make me laugh. Like one of the critiques was, like humor is so idiosyncratic. So, maybe just only call her miscellaneous when she's talking to herself and Lainey the rest of the time. I was like, okay, I guess.
Okay. All right. All right. So Carlos, can you beat that reading?
Well, there's no beating Claire. There's only succeeding Claire. Also, I got to contribute a couple of those names as well, as we were brainstorming hilarious words that we knew. And so most of them are Claire's, of course, but always a great pleasure. Anyway, happy to be here tonight. I hope you all will donate a lot of money to help this super worthy cause. The other option that we were given was to give a sneak preview of the next work that we intend to publish. And so I thought I would give you a sneak peek into the next middle grade book that I am working on. It's called Thig, Thig, and it's called that because, be ready, rats are thigmophilic. That means that rats are touch loving. They love to basically map their whole worlds by rubbing up against everything in 1,080 degrees all around them. And that's basically how they figure out their world. So I took it a step farther. And Thig in my world becomes the language that rats learn to speak with each other and also with a certain set of very special humans who can Thig with them as well. So the narrator of my book is all the rats of New York, all of them. All the rats of New York huddle around a laptop and through the power of Thig are able to write the chronicle that you're going to hear today. I'm going to be reading from chapter 3. It's broken into sections with very long titles. And the title of chapter 3 is actually not that long. This one's one of the shorter ones. It's called Eugenia Lives, 8:25 p.m. The rats in Consuelo's armpits woke up. From their view, the world was both speeding and bouncing by, a blur of people in storefronts and cars and lights, a cacophony of chatter and construction and car horns. Nothing in their lives had prepared the rats to travel this quickly. Consuelo had popped out of the old City Hall subway stop at the bottom of New York City at 8:13 p.m. He crossed 21st Street at 8:24 p.m. That meant he was clocking about a 5.5 minute mile. For a young human, that is fast. But by rat standards, Consuelo Matanuca was a god. He had been running for 11 minutes straight. Any rat that tried that would pop like a fat rat firecracker in under half a minute. And still, all Consuelo wanted, the rats in his pits could Thig it, was to go faster. So, once the two rats had woken up from their 6-heartbeat rat nap, they reminded him with all the electric earnestness with which a rat can Thig that there was still hope. Hope. The rats Thigged over and over with unceasing faith and a love so relentless it felt like a natural force. Hope emanated from them through the sewer-proof hazmat bodysuit that Consuelo wore and into Consuelo's armpits. From there, it filled his body, thrumming with feelings of loyalty, camaraderie, and succeed or die trying resolve. In some ways, Thig, the language, is superior to languages that use words to communicate. Thig doesn't bother with sound or pronunciation. It injects meaning directly into your body. It shoots through your nerves and goes straight to your brain at the speed of tickling. You know how you react instantly when someone tickles you? That's how fast you communicate with Thig. But it's hard to send complex messages with Thig. The more complex the Thig, the more jumbled and mixed messagey the message becomes. So that's why the rats in Consuelo's armpits didn't just Thig to him their good wishes. They spoke out loud with their cutie patootie rat mouths. Eugenia, said the rat in Consuelo's left armpit in Spanish. That rat was named Rabioso. Lives, said the rat in his right armpit in English. Her name was La Plaga. They would have said more, except that they couldn't. Literally, the only word in human Rabioso knew how to say was Eugenia. He was that word's voice. The rat who had been entrusted by the great subterranean dictionary of Lower Manhattan to speak Eugenia's name whenever we needed to speak human out loud. La Plaga was the voice of the word live, but she was so smart. She could say live with a short I and live with a long I, and she could also say living and lived and lives. Amazing. But even geniuses have their limits. One time when La Plaga tried to say enliven, she weed herself and fell into a coma for 3 days. And she definitely couldn't say will live, because will is a whole different word. And Mocovede was the only rat in New York City who could say the word will out loud, and he wasn't there because Consuelo didn't have 3 armpits. But look, what our human vocabularies lack in breadth, they make up for in pasión. Rabioso La Plaga repeated over and over with the unstoppable power of an old-timey choo-choo train, Eugenia lives, Eugenia lives, Eugenia lives. And while they said those words out loud, they figged encouragement and admiration, with their whole bodies shaking like joy buzzers in Consuelo's pits. Humans often find having wiggling rats in their armpits somewhat ticklish, but not Consuelo. That boy was focused like a Spartan on his mission, and everyone knows Spartans are not ticklish. Consuelo, his anger toward the dragon who had eaten his family, growing Spartaneously, bent forward, and just as he passed 22nd Street, started running a 5.25-minute mile. We know. The kid is a god. And that's the excerpt that I'll be reading tonight.
That was so fun. Oh, okay. That was so good.
So good. Oh, it's such a great.
Yeah, so funny and so fun. I wish I had a rat friend I could dig with. I do. I mean, I always thought that rats are not creepy little things like most people do. I think they're really cute and they're very smart. So it would be really nice to have a rat friend to dig with, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe you will one day when you get home.
Or maybe tonight you'll just go out, pick up a rat friend.
Yeah. Hey, yeah.
Pizza crust for tea.
I was just thinking when you said when I go home and I find a rat friend, the rats in Malaysia are enormous. They're like cats, so it might be a bit scary. But
maybe they'll just be
cats are also the size of cats, and we love them. So
okay. Anyway, let's move on from rats. Okay, so we'll go straight to the questions. Okay, so I have one for both of you to start with. So both of your books feature plenty of fantastic female protagonists who are all incredibly complex characters. They all have agency, they have different motivations, but they're also very human and kind of flawed in different ways. Who or what are your inspirations for your female characters? Let's start with Claire because she's next to me.
Oh, I mean, every single woman I've ever known. I mean, I remember being told as a young writer, like in my early 20s, when I first started going to conventions and I was first hearing things I've never heard before, that often women writers, when they're just writing a side character, like a no account, like you go into a pub and there's like a barkeeper, or you go into a library and there's a librarian, or you go to a grocery store, there's a grocer, our default characters are male, because in most of the books we grew up reading, most of the books are populated by mostly males. And so like there's the token female often, especially in fantasy I'm specifically talking about, or some science fiction of an age all the way up to until recently, this great golden age that we're in the middle of living in. And so I was like, oh my gosh. So at that point, I remember thinking like, okay, well, at every opportunity when there's like somebody behind a bar or somebody selling some cake or whatever, like I'll make them female. And then of course later as I grew older and I started thinking more about what's missing in a lot of the fiction I'm reading and what I'm writing, I was like, oh, there's a lot of things I could be doing with all the characters that's not like white male default. And that was, but I remember that being the beginning and thinking like, you know, not writing like the females that I've grown up reading, but writing more like the females I've grown up among. And I think that's super important.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Carlos?
So, yeah, I mean, I grew up around a bunch of amazing women. Of course, my mother was a huge influence, a huge storyteller, a very loving woman, and, you know, kind of a cynosure where, you know, other people would gather around her for all sorts of advice, like all throughout her life. It was cooking advice, but also just like love life advice. And so she was like advisor to everybody, the sort of person who gets stopped at the grocery store and there among the lettuce is dishing out advice because people know to go to her, and she knew to do that. So, you know, I definitely grew up. It's interesting because, you know, in my culture, I grew up in a sort of like Latinx culture in terms of like the church that we went to was very pan Latinx, people from all over the Caribbean and Central and South America, all going to the one church that had mass in Spanish. But there you would just see all of these extremely smart, capable women doing all sorts of stuff, you know? And it's also a culture that is steeped in machismo. And there's all sorts of work that I had to do to, you know, try to dig a little of that machismo out and you know, try to be a little more open-minded about, you know, women and gender politics and all of that. So, you know, for me, it was always very easy to write a strong woman because I had strong women all my life all around me in terms of like their own personalities. But what the culture does to women, that's also something that I got to witness and very unfortunate and you know, something that always affected me. You know, when we were growing up, my sisters were held to such different standards and obvious. And my big sister, Maria, who's super smart, you know, just like a super intelligent go-getter woman, you know, she would point it out. You know, when she was 12 and 13, it's like, well, why can the boys do this and the girls can't do that? And you know, so it was always a part of my life. And you know, I would say like besides my mother, Maria would be like the other person who, you know, she gave me her love of reading. She would pass me down all of her books, and she was a voluminous reader, and so was I by proxy. So I would say those would be the things I would talk about now. There's a lot more to say, though, of course.
Yeah, awesome. Which kind of brings me to my next question, speaking about culture. So, all genres, including fantasy, have their share of female stereotypes and tropes. And both of you write books that feature protagonists who are women and girls of color. And so it's not a stretch to deduce that the risk of stereotyping is tripled when genre, race, and gender intersect. So how do you break or subvert such tropes, such stereotypes, to create female characters of color with agency, well, who deal with the world around them, including situations that involve sexism, misogyny, and violence against women and girls? Maybe, Carlos, since you were talking about culture, then we'll go backwards.
Sure. So, I mean, the first thing to say is that, you know, the job of a book is to sort of like, you know, shine a mirror back to reality for us to get a better look at it. You know, it's to give us multiple vantages. And so, you know, you can't create only people who have agency, because in our world, we're surrounded by people who have their agency taken away from them by bad actors. So one of the things that you do in creating a world is you create tragic scenarios. You create, you know, not in the traditional sense, comic scenarios, because I mean, neither funny nor getting married at the end of a Shakespeare play, but, you know, ones with upward trajectories. And, you know, the thing that I find in writing these stories that's really important is whatever is happening to the character, their reaction to it is a measure of their character. The same way that we can talk about people in our real life, you know, it's how you react to the stimuli and stresses. And so what I think is important in writing a rounded character, who's a woman who is, trapped in a society almost always that is, a patriarchal society that is doing harm to women. Like, unless you're writing like Joanna Russ is, you're probably duplicating some of those things in the culture that you're representing in your books. How do you imagine a different world? So for me, that was to invent a different school in my Sal and Gabby books. What I wanted was a school that was run by an extremely intelligent and powerful woman, the principal of Kuleko Academy. And, basically there's a trickle down effect of the sort of freedom that's created in that environment, so that, whatever the outside world is going to do, in that school, you can have people like Gabi Real, who's president and just ready to take over the world and should take over the world because she's really good at world making and handling and all of that stuff. So, in my, what I imagine was like, we can create these sort of like pockets of light where, maybe the rules of larger patriarchal society don't apply. That's like one example.
All right. Claire, what do you think?
When I was in college, I used to write for a lot of 24-hour theater festivals. And so I'd show up at like 8 p.m. and I would get assigned I would pull a director out of a hat of 6 directors, and then that director would pull 3 actors out of a hat. We'd all get together and talk for like 15 minutes. Each of the actors talked for 5 minutes. Then I'd go home and write a play for them, come back, and they'd put it on, they'd rehearse all the next day, put it on at 8 p.m. the next night. So I got to write for a bunch of different voices and actors and like hear what they've always wanted to be, like what they get stereotyped as. So, but what they think they would never get cast as, what their like dearest hope to play one day is. I found that so fascinating. And around, around draft 4, The Hunger Games came out, and there was some terrible racism around the young actor who played Rue, Amandla Stenberg.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so mad. I was so mad. And I was like, that actor is so fine. And I was like, if only that I could write a character that would be worthy of them to play, like that sort of, and it was private, like most of us we're never even going to get near a movie adaptation for our books. And I was aware of that even then, but in my head, I was like, if I were given that actor in a 24-hour festival, what sort of character would make them excited to play, And that was the beginning of like somebody I hugely respect and am even in awe of. What could I do that would make them excited? And so that was one way I did it for this particular book, for that particular character.
Wow, that's amazing. I was just thinking of like when I was reading the book. You're talking about Saint Death's daughter, right?
Yeah.
So Lainey. And I was reading the book. I was imagining her as she was described in the book, and you're right. She's Amanda Stenberg. So yeah.
I don't think I've ever said that in public before. I'm a little embarrassed. But.
That's awesome. That's such a nice thing to do, actually. I mean, it's such an awesome thing. Maybe we can, if your book does get optioned, maybe we can show her this video, persuade her to play it.
Hey, Amanda, call me.
Yeah. All right. So, your female characters are tough and multifaceted women and girls of color. But some readers may perceive their strength and determination, resourcefulness, and very human flaws as unlikable and ruthless, instead of lauding them as likable or strong and determined as they would if they were white and male. So I've seen some reviews. Gabi has been described as pushy and annoying. So, on the other hand, Claire, your character Nita is a classic narcissistic sociopath. She's awful, and I've seen there are very few discussions about all the violence she perpetrates: murder, kidnapping, sexual assault. So, do you ever feel pressured by gender and cultural stereotypes to make your female characters likable or relatable? Let's go, Claire.
Oh, Nita, she's kind of a piece of work, because what I feel pressure for is like, remember both at the same time that she's a monster and at the same time pity her, I guess. Or like, this is a world where she has a yawning emptiness, and part of it is the culture she was raised in, expectations, stereotype, and part of it is maybe like a weird like breeding program where like for generations back her people have looked for ruthless, you know, cheerfully malevolent partners to match their aesthetic, and here she is the product of that. Like, and as a baby she would have had no control over that, and as she grew up she was never taught differently, and by the time she had teachers who might have done, she was so entrenched, like the fear of change would have made her so brittle that she would have just dug in. So like I pity her, but also like she needed to be ripped out of the world, you know. So, and I guess like there in fantasy there's a way to there's a way you can do that, but I didn't want her death to seem like, yes, you know, like I didn't want people to go and like celebrate and like wave banners around, maybe feel relief and a great sadness at a waste, you know, like I guess that's how I feel. But like really it's all the people she harmed, the chance for them to live and breathe in the sunlight outside of her coldness is that's really what I wanted to concentrate on.
Right. So I guess you what's my question? So yeah, so I guess you're saying that you don't actually conform to these stereotypes and making girls likable.
Well, I'm not very likable all the time. I'm super
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
I think that I have very lovable traits and charming, and I try to be kind, but none of, I mean, I'm sometimes snappish and irritable, and, you know, and I sometimes have mean thoughts. I don't necessarily want to, but I, again, like what Carlos was saying about we want to reflect the world, not just have one kind of person. And even a really kind person or character, like in my history of like loving characters and reading about them, I was telling Carlos about in Anne of Green Gables, like one of the dreamiest, most likable characters you ever will meet. In the second book, she whips a child, and it goes against what she wanted. It goes against her pedagogy. She has a toothache one day, and this kid is like bullying people, mouthing off, and explodes a firecracker in her room and then laughs about it. And she whips him, and she regrets it from the moment she does it on. And yet it makes her so much more human. And that's like Anne of Green Gables. So I feel like that's the sort of character I grew up with, is like really likable characters who do intensely dislikable things sometimes. I grew up with myself looking in the mirror, you know, all around me, like how much forgiveness, how much grace do we give the people we love for being human, I think is important. So I've not met many a true monster in my life, but I have been peripheral to people who have lived in the shadows of true monsters, and I'm so interested in tenderness and their recovery and their strength, and I'm grateful that they survived their monsters. So I guess it's more like that question of, I'm more interested in the survivors than the monsters, but if I'm going to write about the monsters, I want to make them human in some way. Yeah.
Carlos, how about you? Do you feel pressured by gender and cultural stereotypes to make your characters likable?
Yeah, the question was, you know, making characters likable, and you know,
or relatable.
My immediate thought is that is likable to whom? Like who is being the judge who's deciding what ultimate characteristics are always and every time likable? You know, it's like, am I going to trust Goodreads? Is Goodreads going to who's likable and who's not likable, and they'll just give me the list of the things I need to do to make them likable? Spoiler alert, no, Goodreads is terrible. What we say when we say, oh, your character isn't likable, that word is a sin. That word is trying to tell you that there's a framework in which likability exists universally, and that is a lie. You will never create a character that is likable to everyone, and neither should you try. Like, again, what we're trying to do is create people who are real and complex, and people will have different reactions. Nobody's loved by everyone, or if they are, they're not a whole person at that point. They've become more of a symbol, you know. So Betty White everybody loved, but not everybody knew Betty White, like the real Betty White, and not that I knew the evil Betty White or anything. I'm not saying anything about Betty White. Betty White was pretty on the outside anyway, but who knows what lurks
Okay.
in the mind of Betty White. My point is, when we
Oh gosh.
these fake standards of likable, not likable, we're feeding right into patriarchy and that idea of like you need to conform to a very tiny small idea of basically what the male gaze wants you to do. And no, suck my nose. We're not doing that.
Yeah, okay. Have either of you noticed a difference in the degree of flack that you might get for not making your female characters likable based on your own genders?
But can you say it one more time? I missed a little bit of that.
Have either of you noticed any difference in the degree of flack you might get for not making a female character likable enough based on your own gender?
Oh, that's interesting. Based on my own gender, I say I'm probably. I think it's a double-edged sword. There are some people like, well, how can you write about women? You're a cis man who identifies as such. The answer to that is if you ever want a book written, you have to let this idea that a person can write about things outside of their own experience be a thing. And R.L. Kwong had a really good article, I think it was in The Guardian, where she was making the same argument. But the idea that gender absolutely limits what you can talk about is also a kind of chilling effect that a certain kind of politics wants and a certain kind of thought is asking us to think about. So yeah, I would say like if the question is based on gender, if again, it's like if that's what people say, that's one thing. But is that how we should live our lives? I would say definitely not.
Okay. How about you, Claire?
I really try very hard not to actually read any reviews about my work. So whether or not I'm given flack, I am so happily ignorant of it. Occasionally people will tag me in their reviews of my book, and mostly this is a joyful occasion that I deeply appreciate, because the truth is I can't help but read it when it's given to me. And if I'm accidentally like on my own page on Amazon to like grab a URL or something to, whatever, and it catches my eye, but I find it very damaging. No matter why they're doing it, they could be doing it. I could be like a green Martian with a Martian gender that is heretofore undiscovered by humanity, and they they could be saying the same things. You never know who's giving Amazon reviews. You know what I mean? I've not been in any of the corners of the internet where my gender was being discussed regarding my writing. It may be happening, and I just want to like let people do their thing and discuss amongst themselves. It was hard enough. The book took me 12 years to write. It's hard enough to write and just be in the world. So blessings on their head. They can say what just don't tag me in it.
I think that's a healthy way to live. All right. So both of you have written books that definitely pass the Bechdel test, which is with an inclusion of complex relationships between women and girls. What can you suggest for writers who want to write female conversations and relationships realistically? What can they do? Claire.
There's just scenes. I just love like when my characters just go eat something or like have tea or talk about a book they read, because really the Bechdel test idea was illuminating, and I think until I had read about it, I hadn't done it. I hadn't done that work. Sometimes because I write like, especially when I was younger, like a lot of like little romances, or there would be the male and female, they would always just be together. And so especially in this one, maybe around draft 4 or 5, I was like, I haven't passed the Bechdel test yet, And so like sometimes I'm just like, all right, so let them chat about like chocolate, or like most of the time talk about so many things. And it's sort of like the trouble is, how do you do it in a book that advances the plot, illuminates the character, and does some work in the scene, and then so much depends on who the other characters are around that you have to be advancing and moving plots through. So, but because I try to put a lot of female characters in this book, finding things for them to talk about was good. There was a lot going on that didn't relate to males, which I thought it was like, all right, this is a good book to do it in. It's not a romance novel between a male and a female, so that definitely helped, because I think genre sometimes, depending on what genre and what subgenre you're writing in, makes it harder and harder. But yeah, but how would I suggest it would be like, look at all the conversations you have during a day. How many times have you passed the Bechdel test today? And then think about that, and then what are realistic, grounding conversations these characters can have about these epic things happening in your fantasy that don't have to do with a guy. Like, yeah. I think once you start thinking about it, it becomes easier, but it's actually, because we're in such autopilot when we're writing sometimes, it's not easy until you start thinking about it.
Interesting. Okay, Carlos?
Yeah, the way I would add to that very good advice is to say, if your characters are complex, they're going to be more than thinking about, I need a man. The test is really like, if there are two women and the only thing they can talk about is another man in another place, clearly they're shallow characters. They're flat characters who are only there to advance a plot point. So the job is to make not flat women characters, I mean, obviously in all books you'll have some characters who are flat, but the idea of I mean, it's almost comical when you sort of think about it, that, and you see this actually, the Bechdel test is great because it's not just women characters. Like, once you see the trick, oftentimes in a movie that has the name of the main character as its title, like Shaft or something like that, then all of a sudden, every character is talking about, well, what's Shaft doing today? Or this happens in murder mysteries a lot too, like with Columbo. Columbo, what do you think of the race? Like, everything is focused, toward this main character who becomes, and Sherlock Holmes is of course like the greatest example. Like, no one gets to think except Sherlock Holmes. He's the only one who's doing any thinking in any of those stories, and that's how he becomes this mythic kind of stature. So the Bechdel test is actually a great illuminator to an even larger problem of how shallow are all your characters? Are they only all serving as plot points except for your one main character, maybe? But yeah, so think about the fact that women are people and they have desires, and those desires are manifold. They have many different areas in which they might have to, and so then you start thinking, as you're plotting and you're scheming to make the novel, where you position your important characters, and when do you give time toward advancing the story? When do you give time to making sure that these characters feel fully realized? And how can you mix those two together so that you're doing multiple things in a scene?
Good. That's great advice. Okay. All right. So we've been talking about women. Let's talk about men. In the stories both of you write, there may be some really horrible men, but there are few or no misogynistic characters, and the male and female relationships between the main characters are generally equitable, and your male characters are generally respectful of women and their thoughts and decisions. So do you think reframing how stories describe men away from hostile and toxic stereotypes and towards complexity and even vulnerability can be one of the ways that science fiction fantasy writers can break away from the tropes that promote toxic masculinity and the dehumanization of women? Claire?
Yes, I do. And okay, so Grandpa Rad is a horrible, almost like my metaphor for the patriarchy. Old, dead, and yet still incredibly powerful. It exerts an undue influence on events. But Maccobian, who is Lainey's sister's captive, so he's a victim for most of it. He's super damaged, and he has a radius of wound, but once he kind of can get out from under that terrible influence and start his healing process, he was one of the most complex characters to write. And I'm really glad that I met Carlos at draft 4 of this novel, because that gave me 8 drafts with Carlos to be Mac used to be a character who was very much like a romance novel, bad boy kind of like, I don't know, hottie with a hatred complex. But every time I would like slip into that kind of old stereotype, Carlos would be like, grown-ups just don't act like that. Or like no, I don't think Mac would do that. I'd be like, how do you know what Mac would do? I've been living with Mac for 7 years. And he's like, no, like when you're raising a child, you don't just let that child scream at you. And then, you talk to them and, you make sure that they apologize and reconcile. And, and if he finds out that he's ever wrong about something, he should go away and think about it and then come back and say, I was wrong about that. I was like, he should. Oh my gosh, Mac was so hard to write, and yet he became my favorite character in a way that that wasn't just like a lusty rom-com like hot stuff, enemies to lovers sort of thing. And it became very apparent that in this state he couldn't ever actually end up being Lainey's love interest, which had been my intention from early drafts, but that in fact he's more valuable as all the other things a male can be to a female protagonist, as a brother and a best friend and somebody who was there in the heart of the damage with her, and that they both bear scars and they understand each other on a very specific, deep level. And like, I was like, oh, wow, this book is not becoming the fantasy romance I thought I was writing, but I kind of like it better. So, but I think that it does more work maybe in the world, in my little tiny corner of the world, to be like, yeah, you don't have to writing in that awesome genre that I read a lot of, romance and science fiction and fantasy, is wonderful, but it doesn't satisfy me in the same way to write it as it does maybe to read it. Like, it's much more interesting to write that kind of character, but I had to grow into that. I fought it for a while and then I just surrendered, and I'm so happy.
I really like the character Mac. He, like you said, he behaves in a very adult way. So that's what a human male adult should be like. And I was so glad that he became that,
I want to dedicate that character to Carlos Hernandez.
It's all down to Carlos. It was because of him that Mac became who he is now.
For sure.
Yeah. Thank you, Carlos. All right, so Carlos, what about you?
So to me, like, I think one of the things that I thought was really important, like in my writing throughout, was definitely to, sort of like question male models that I had received and imagine different models. So like, in the Assimilated Cuban's Guide to Quantum Santeria, there were a lot of stories that spoke to relationships of fathers and sons, and kind of like that lineage and the sort of like male construction of identity. There are lots of ways in which that's done. And that in that place, it was much more of a sort of like exploration with the idea of having narrators who were sort of like questioning the worlds in which they were inserted, in which some kind of harm was being caused. When I moved on to the Sal and Gabi books to write those, at this point, what I wanted to do was sort of like, okay, sometimes we write characters because we want to, have them be the focus point of a kind of problem or idea that we want the main character to circle against. But some characters can be aspirational. Some characters can be characters that help us imagine a different way of doing things. And so, I don't think I have too many harmful men in the Sal and Gabi books, and quite to the contrary, have a lot of guys who are just like, we love life, we love our families, we love ideas, and they love art. Good people. Say again?
They love art and they love education, and they do it well.
Exactly. And it's just sort of like, people who are curious and happy, and don't have to constantly display physical power as a manifestation of who they are. Instead, they're driven by the desire to do good in the world, and the desire to discover more about the beautiful complexity of this world. And I feel like those are good models to have with us, that people who, again, are flawed. So, Sal's dad is caught in the second book smoking. he's been sneaking cigarettes, cigars specifically, I should say. Actually, he's been, and he had this big success and, got a cigar and is doing it. And he gets caught, even though, there was this whole deal, like he was going to give up smoking and stuff. Flawed, but also very human. And the way that they have their conversation out on the porch, about, how they're going to make up for it and, going to do better and everything, I feel was, like one of those moments. It's just like, it's a model for a way for, people who consider themselves adults to admit wrong and to figure out how to move forward after that wrong.
Yeah.
And no yelling, no violence, no punching of things, more just like,
Yeah. And it's still a compelling story without all of that, right? You can still have really interesting characters without the
more
drama.
so, because there are only so many times you can watch Chuck Norris punch a person unconscious before you're like, okay, got it. I understand that now Chuck Norris memes will become de rigueur in 20 years after he's made a movie or anything. But yeah, just it's a sort of thing where it's like, if we're talking about what novels can do, and especially what novels can do best, they can probe inside of characters' minds, in a way films can't, in a way theater can't. Nothing gets deeper inside of a character than a novel can. I mean, and the written arts in general, but you need that time to be able to go inside of a person, and only novels can really go as far as in terms of a genre. So leaning into that, I think, makes your novels stronger. It makes them more uniquely good at what novels can do.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So now's a good time to ask a question from the audience. We have one here from Misty06. Hi, Misty. Misty's one of our they try to make it every time we have a live stream. So, will you two be collaborating on any books anytime soon?
Oh,
well, yeah. First of all, collaborated on fiction several times. Claire's got 3, 1, 2, or several. So 3 counts as several. I think you can find online a story called A Minnow, or perhaps a Colossal Squid, which we collaborated on and ended up to be in Paula Grand's one of her year's best.
It's on Mermaids Monthly, which is an online magazine that lasted the year of 2021, I think, during the pandemic. Some friends of ours put up an all mermaids all the time thing, and so we had a great time collaborating on that in a world where we've co-created a game. We've designed a tabletop role-playing game called Negocios Infernales that has this really cool deck of like 70 cards with weird pictures and sayings. And so in that world that we sort of built for that role-playing game, we wrote that story kind of inside that world, a little bit peripheral to the game. So we had a really fun time world building, creating characters, talking about the weird magic, and that was a really great time.
Awesome. Anything in the works? The two of you collaborating on? Can you reveal? No.
We don't have anything quite in the works. The thing is, we're almost always collaborating in a sense because we're each other's first readers. So it's really like every time I write a chapter, read it to him, and he asks me 5 questions, I'm like, rewrite the chapter. He's writing so many cool things. There's a world that we've sort of worked on building, that I think Carlos is probably going to give a stab at, but maybe it will be a collaboration. But I know I've helped build the world for it. So I'm sure that there will be some fun things in the future.
Awesome.
Plus, we did collaborate on making a game together, which was it's a 100-page rule book. It's a complicated thing to make together. So I would say
write that whole rule book together. That was a book. That was definitely a book.
So that counts, I think.
Yeah, cool. All right. So let's talk about stories. Stories are one of the most powerful ways of bringing about social change. Let's talk about writing stories and genre. So the line between consent and coercion isn't always clear in SFF books. Certainly in some subgenres such as paranormal romance, grimdark fantasy, violence against women is still often used as a catalyst for a male character's development or as a shorthand for showing how brutal the world is. In your opinion, how can authors strike a balance in their storytelling between raising awareness about violence against women while telling an engaging story without being pedantic or preachy? Claire.
I mean, yeah, because I read a lot of like urban fantasy, paranormal romance, and it's sort of like that kind of toxic masculinity is what
Mm.
is so predominantly sexy. The alpha male who's like, I'm going to yell at you, or I'm going to like rip something apart in front of you, and you're going to fear me, and that will be super sexy. And like, it's interesting kind of how the use of fear and strength, and then the language of like love and I don't know, sensuality all gets kind of mixed up and confused in the mind and the body. Um, so so it's so interesting because I don't think that those books are trying to do work about raising awareness. I don't think that's their goal, and maybe it shouldn't be. It's maybe exploring a different part of the human psyche, forbidden desires or fantasies in a different way. So for those of us who our goal is to raise aware of violence, then maybe maybe not making that sexy is, you know, one way to do it, or to discuss in the book the difference between consent, you know, or to discuss like, I don't mind enacting this fantasy with you, but truthfully what I really value in a partner is somebody to cook tacos with, you know. Like, I feel like there's room in fantasy to like, you can have that discussion in page, you know, and rather than kind of following uh received language running along the grooves the dead have worn with their thumbnails, you know, like I think it, but it, if that's what you want to do with your writing, if that's what you're going for. And also like, there's room in paranormal romance and grimdark fantasy for uh for having a different kind of character and discussing it in a different way. I think that like, it's really like examining what you're doing, what's feeding into it, how much is conscious, you know, what are the decisions you've made, what is helpful and what mightn't be. And there's like, the thing is, that word is like that Carlos was saying, somebody's thing that is, that might be triggering to them could be illuminating or revelatory to somebody else. Sometimes we don't know what's helpful.
Carlos?
Yeah, so Claire's, answer is complex, varied, and multifaceted, covering all sorts of different areas. But so I'm gonna kind of like go to the other side and try to be very practical. First of all, don't write about 20-year-olds all the time. 20-year-olds do not have life figured out, and 20-year-olds should not be saving the world all the time. Like, really, in terms of age groups, we can go a little bigger, a little older. If we go a little older, we might have different kinds of stories that people tell, because at my age right now, I'm very different than the 20-year-old that I once was. And I'm very glad for it. And sometimes I'm very embarrassed about the 20-year-old, and the things that 20-year-old thought and did. And ye gods, thank goodness phones were not as pervasive back then as they are. They were big. You had to put a VHS tape in them. They were obvious. So, it was, thank goodness. And that's what I mean. It's like, so very practically, let's extend the range of, people that we write about in terms of, for instance, age. That's one place that we can start. And specifically in terms about violence. As a person who's a cis het male, I am going to be very careful about any depiction of violence that a man is going to perpetrate against a woman. Most of the time erring on the side of not doing it. But let's say it's a sword fight or something, like I'm writing some kind of battle scene. What I want to do is make it sort of like equal in the sense, or make sure that it's equity in terms of, who's doing what for what reasons and what power, but not reveling or glorifying it in a way like this is the way that things should be. So a lot of it has to do with author perspective, and you position scenes with every way that you describe it, every adjective that you use, every way that you try to make people understand not only what is happening, but what's important about what's happening. So if you're centering the idea of a presumably alpha male. By the way, that whole alpha wolf thing, total nonsense.
Yes, we know, and so do the writers.
Right. But it's penetrated the culture. Right? The pop culture now is spinning itself with this idea of alpha-ness, even though it has nothing to do with how wolves actually work. But the idea that I should make you fear me a little bit because that's sexy or whatever. That's that can be framed a little bit differently. And like, we want to be complex, and people are going to have different turn-ons and kinks or whatever, but received turn-ons and received kinks are much more boring than something that is sort of like original and that sheds a new light on some facet of our infinitely complex human minds. So what I would say to the authors out there is like, we got the part, where, a part of the culture has found, flexing, violent people. Like we know, like, that bad boy thing. We got that. What else is sexy? What else is interesting? What else doesn't involve hurting someone else that might also be really great, so I would, and I'm trying to put it in a very light way because, like, what I really want to say is that, the ways in which violence is casually and flippantly treated as a given in so much fiction should start to disgust us now. Like, we should be disgusted by the ways in which casual, thoughtless violence is presented in a way as if that's just how the world works. And if you're going to take time to think about putting words together long enough to complete 80,000 of them to do a novel, maybe it's worth thinking about what exactly you want your world to be, and maybe the things that you write can have a different kind of effect in the world if you don't just focus on the received ideas about, how violence works in the world.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. All right. So I'll go to my next question. I'm just checking that we don't have any more questions from the audience. Okay, so my next question is, geek culture in general, including science fiction and fantasy, has had its share of critics saying that it's still too male-dominated, despite there being a rising number of prominent and well-respected and well-known female authors. But there's still plenty of hostile, misogynistic, and sexist behavior by male geeks towards female geeks. What do you think needs to be done to make geek culture as a whole, whether it's comics or gaming or books or cons, more welcoming for women and girls? Claire.
There's so much work that is being done. So I know what it looks like when it's working. And like one of the things you're doing today is you have gatekeepers shutting down trolls, right? Like, and in some ways it's sort of like, this is a space. This is an agreed upon space, like the golden circle in gaming. Like, inside this circle, these are the rules, so we can all play together. And if you don't want to play by the rules, this is not the space you're going to be in. And I feel like, and that requires rules that are very clear and a very clear, I don't know, set of consequences, like a society where there's like, all right, go outside the gates until you're ready to come back in and reconcile. I don't know. It's very interesting that like almost the rise of rules that it may not be as happy-go-lucky and free and easy as maybe it was 20 years ago. But now we know the word consent, and we can say no clearly, and like that idea of like, it's a rule, no means no, so that we have the language for it that we might not have had 20 years ago, where she's saying no, she really means yes. So I think we're figuring out the language and the etiquette in physical spaces and in internet spaces. I feel like it's an infrastructure problem in some ways, because there are more female voices, there are more writers of color, but it's not just the writers that need to change. It is like editors, it's publishers, it's agents, it's the whole infrastructure, because like everybody who loves to read are many people and various, like, and people who so to make the common spaces safe, there has to be, it's just like there's a lot of discussion and organization and volunteering and hard work, and it's really not like easy. So taking care of the people who are caretaking, supporting organizations, volunteering time, like if you want to see change, help be that change. And it's not easy work, but I'm so grateful to everybody who's doing it. So let's do more of it.
Yes. Carlos, what do you think?
No, I mean, it really is that. I'm old enough to remember sexual harassment trainings that I would get at my university that, looking back on them now, were so milquetoast and so non-confrontational that I look back at them now and thinking we should have been doing a lot more a lot sooner. Like that's how I remember them thinking, the clarity now that comes with sexual harassment didn't happen in a year and it didn't happen in 5 years. It's been, a good, like, I think I had my first sexual harassment training when I went to graduate school in the 90s, when, we were talking about sort of like how, perhaps professors should not be having relationships with their students because there's a different power dynamic, and, you know, being at cocktail parties where, professors would still be talking about, things that maybe would have violated those policies, and now thinking we've moved so very far away from that in the way that corporations talk about it, in which just like so the window has shifted, and I think what we need is just what Claire said, just like a culture wide pile-on of constant pressure to very slowly move that window further and further toward a place of equity. And the problem, it's hard work because it's slow work. It doesn't happen fast. And when we're talking about slow work, we're talking about the work of generations, and it's not going to be a straight ascension. It's going to be a rickety line of progress and lack of progress and backtracking and difficult, but the pressure needs to be maintained in all areas as much as we can do, so we can move it as quickly as possible, which I'm very sorry to say I don't think will be very fast. I just think it takes a long time to move the world into a better place.
Yeah, you're right. It's hard work. I mean, that's a reason we're doing the work that we do in the Pixel Project. We do all these live streams and everything, and we've been doing it for 10 years, like I said in the beginning. And we've moved it a little bit, but it takes a lot of people doing a lot of hard work to get to where we are right now, and people like you as well. So thank you so much for being here, helping us with this. So I've come to my last question. We've been talking for more than an hour. So the two of you have been so very incredibly supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti-violence against women work in general. This is a bit of a Captain Obvious question, but we ask everyone we have on the live streams these questions. Why do you support the cause to end violence against women? And what do you think authors can do to help with the cultural change needed to eradicate violence against women and girls? Claire.
Why do I support it? I would love for us to be able to walk unafraid, just take a walk at night, or go to a convention or go to a coffee shop and have neighborly, friendly, human, warm interactions with each other without fear. I would love that. I would love it so much. I would love for some generation soon not to grow up with the numbers 1 out of every 4 in their head, which is how I grew up. 1 out of every 4, and like looking around in any room and thinking how many of us, I'd love that. And so whatever I can do, and part of it's paying attention, and part of it's saying yes to opportunities that where there are organizations that will help, or if I see there's fundraising going on in another corner, or even boosting signals. Like signal boosting is large when you can do nothing else. There's like being part of the network. Anything I can do, I will. But I know there's that feeling I always want to do more, or what is the right thing to do? And I know there's no one right way. There's just as many ways as you can, or digging down into one way and giving a lot of energy to it. So that's what I would like to do, and in my own work to create hope and safe spaces for my female characters to grow in power. That's what I want.
Before we go to Carlos, I just have to put this on. Regina, who is Pixel Project founder, said it's worse. It's actually 1 in 3 women and girls.
Oh, I grew up with different numbers, but it is worse. That's terrible.
Yeah.
I hate that.
25%, yeah. Well, that's the world we live in. And
Yeah.
I was out with some friends last night, and we had a drink, and my friend said, "Oh, just leave your drink here, and we'll just go." And I was like, "I know." And he looked at me like, "What do you mean?" And I was like, "No, I'm not leaving my drink unattended." And the light went. I mean, I love him; he's amazing, but they don't think about things like this. And but for women, it's just so it's been drilled into you, like you said, and you grow up hearing all these things of don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. Be safe, make yourself safe, and it will be so great to live in a world where you don't have to think that. Yeah. All right, Carlos, go to you.
Yeah, I mean, supporting a project like this is a no-brainer because, I think at the end of the day, it's pretty inarguable to say that we want a world where everybody can be their happiest, best selves and reach their full potential. And clearly, we've created a society where not everybody is given the same opportunities to reach their whole potential. I mean, half the population living in that kind of fear that with the numbers 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 in their heads is just, it should be unthinkable, and it's like we want to write complex characters, we want as writers to make sure that we're showing people, in the full gamut of their emotions. And so it's a complicated issue as a writer, because when you're holding up a mirror, sometimes people think that's endorsement, but what we should be doing as writers is really trying to give the world back to people in ways that they're ready to receive it. And I think science fiction, fantasy, the genre fictions have a very special place in that, because sometimes there's just enough of a shield between the real world and the fantasy to make conversations possible that wouldn't be possible in another way, because people will feel attacked, or they'll feel it's too close to home, they'll feel triggered by the reality of it. When you put that little scrim, suddenly conversations might become more possible. So, I think science fiction right now, fantasy right now, is in a terrific place where it's able to talk about more social justice issues than, maybe escapist fantasy of the pulps once upon a time would ever dare touch, or, maybe it was catering to a different audience or whatever. I think now we're just in a place where we're seeing, incredible women writers writing about women's experiences through the lens of SFF. And it's like Claire said earlier, it's led to a kind of a golden age that we're in right now in terms of that, in that writing.
Awesome. All right, so that's brought us to the end of our Q&A session. Thank you so much for answering all our questions, and thanks to the audience for your questions. There was a very lively discussion going on in the comment section while you were speaking, which is great. We love that. So if you missed the beginning of the session, I'm just going to go through again all the amazing stuff that Claire and Carlos have really generously donated that you can get if you go to our Rally Up fundraising page. So Claire has donated 4 goodie bundles. 2 of them are gone, so only 2 are left. The 2 left are a Desdemona and the Deep bundle with a matching necklace and bookmark. You got it there?
So here's Desdemona in the Deep, and then it's like this cool, like amber and green that matches. Isn't that pretty?
Oh, so cool. And then the other one is the Twice Drowned Saint bundle with a matching necklace and a bookmark.
Isn't that
so
pretty?
lovely. Yeah, so lovely.
Oh, yeah.
Wow, yeah.
I know you do.
Yeah. So, and Carlos has an amazing donation, which is for speculative fiction authors. Carlos has 1 online writing consultation session available where he will read the first chapter of your work in progress and then conduct a 60-minute Zoom meeting with you to offer constructive critique and share writing advice. So this is a golden opportunity for any writer who is working on getting their first book published, or an experienced writer who needs a professional pair of eyes to look at their work and get expert guidance.
Basically, you get what I get every day, which is, let me tell you, extraordinary.
Yeah. So it's great. So go and snap it up. So we've also have plenty more author goodies available from authors including Anne Bishop, Brandon Sanderson, Grim Oak Press, Jasper Ford, Jen Williams, Jim C. Hayes, Mary Robinette Cowell, Martha Wells, RJ Barker, Samantha Shannon, so many more. And we'll be releasing more as the fundraiser goes on. We've raised $1,935, which is 19% towards our $10,000 goal. So please do give generously before the fundraiser ends in October 2023. All funds go to the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. I'm going to share a slide here, if I can get it on. Okay, so that's the link. And our producers are putting the links up in the chat box, so go and check it out. So you can donate to get these goodies on RallyUp at tinyurl.com/R4PRallyUp 2023. And yes, the link is up there. And if you want to learn more about Read for Pixels and all the other live streams we have coming up with some amazing authors, we have really good panels as well this time for our 10th year anniversary. Go and check out our Read for Pixels page on our website. And that link is gone in the chat box as well. And we also have an anthology called Giving the Devil His Due. So this is the Pixel Project's Shirley Jackson Award nominated and Audie Award nominated charity anthology, Giving the Devil His Due. It's kind of like where Twilight Zone meets Promising Young Woman. Those horror, scary stories, really good. It's available in ebook, paperback, audiobook editions, and available to order from major booksellers, including Amazon, Audible, Kobo, Barnes & Noble, Spotify, Google Play, and more. So this is for the audiobook. And we've also teamed up with 12 of the 16 authors in the book to offer exclusive limited edition anthology bookplate. Each author will sign 16 bookplates. It will be on a first-come, first-served basis. Each bookplate includes a resource for domestic violence and sexual assault victims and survivors in 205 countries. So that link is gone in the chat box as well. Go and check it out. So all net proceeds from this goes towards keeping the Pixel Project's campaigns, programs, and initiatives such as this one alive and kicking. Oh yes, and please note that the anthology is a limited edition. It's only available until 31st October 2023, which is in like a month. So get your copies right now before they go. And to find out more about violence against women, about the Pixel Project's work, about what you can do to help end violence against women, please do go check out our website, www.thepixelproject.net. We have a lot of really amazing and accessible resources in there. Right, so before we sign off, do you have any announcements, Claire and Carlos?
Oh, Carlos and I are so excited that our game that we designed, Negocios Infernales, which is a tabletop GM-less role-playing game, diceless, GM-less, collaborative. Our publishing company, Outland Entertainment, is doing our Kickstarter for it starting in October.
All right.
Do you want to say anything about it, Carlos?
Oh, I mean, I think the link is going to appear in the chat in a second here, but you can sign up for notifications for the Kickstarter and stuff there if you'd like to. So
it's like the concept, the Spanish Inquisition, interrupted by aliens.
Oh, wow. That sounds so fun. All right. So let's see if our producer puts the link in the chat box. If not, I can do it. Let me try and see if I can do that.
If not, it's negociosinfernales.com. Yep. Will take you right to the Kickstarter sign up to be notified page.
And if you follow Claire or me on social media, you'll be hearing plenty about it in the coming weeks.
All right. So the link has gone up in the chat box. So go and check that out and go to the Kickstarter. Okay. So that's it. That's all. That's it from us. And Claire and Carlos, thank you so much once again. And to everyone out there, good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you are in the world. And goodbye.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you for having us.